Honorable Leader of the Opposition, please continue with your debate.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I notice my colleagues out there are trying to curtail my time. But be that as it may, I will continue, and whatever they decide to give me, I shall be grateful. Madam Speaker, when we took the luncheon break, I was talking about the having consulted the people and what we in the opposition had done, but me in particular. I know, Madam Speaker, would like to look at an area that I believe is absolutely necessary in this whole process so that we can get some clarity thereon. Madam Speaker, the government has given a number of reasons why we have had to rush this bill through because because of their fear of being in contempt of the courts. Madam Speaker, I would say to the government that, like the Premier said, the appeals judge struck down, the appeals court struck down the decision made by the Chief Justice, signaling that the Chief Justice has no jurisdiction to make laws in this country. And that was, I think the appeals court made it abundantly clear, unequivocally, that the court, of course, does not possess that jurisdiction. My question is, why do we think the appeals court possess that jurisdiction? Where did they get the authority to tell the legislature what to do? Madam Speaker, when that ruling was sent down or delivered, I think it was November 7th last year, I engaged the Attorney General on the floor of this Honorable House shortly thereafter and asked him about moving forward with an appeal of the appeals decision. He said then that he was, I believe his words were, he was a creature of instructions. In other words, he would await the instruction of the executive or this parliament to proceed therewith, if that was the wish, and that his chamber was very capable of doing such. Madam Speaker, I believe that then and I believe that now. But yet the Premier comes here and says that it was the executive who instructed the Attorney General before it came to Parliament to appeal the Chief Justice ruling. My question is, why didn't we appeal this one? Because I believe it was an overstep. It was definitely an overstep. Madam Speaker, when we in some ways, I am a little, I can't say elated, but at least I recognize that the appeals court made it clear that marriage is not an option based on the wording of the Constitution. I recall, Madam Speaker, when we were, the member from Savannah and I brought a motion on a referendum for the same-sex marriage. I believe it might have been 2 people from that side. This was during the administration of 2013 to 2017. And I recall one of them in particular was the then Minister of Finance, Marco Archer, who proffered that same position at the time. Madam Speaker, the UK government had every opportunity, because notice, whilst the Premier and the government position is that this is not marriage that we're doing here, same-sex marriage, the Premier read out the declaration by the appeals court, which says, and I take the part that where they say that Chantal Day and Vickett Baden-Bush are entitled expeditiously to legal protection in the Cayman Islands. This is the part which is functionally equivalent to marriage. What it says to me is that a rose, or any color is a rose, whether it's blue, purple, green, yellow, pink, that's what they're telling us. Now, Madam Speaker, the Premier went on to say, and I'm paraphrasing, and he can correct me if he so wish, that there is a possibility that England can do worse than what we're doing here. Now, they would only have changed the name and say marriage. Right. Now, if such is the case, Madam Speaker, why is it that England allowed us, this honorable House, sometime in early 2008, to amend the marriage law to say marriage was between a man and a woman, opposite sex? Was they knew that we were going into negotiations with them momentarily. If they intended in putting a contrary position in that Constitution, they would not have allowed that. Now, let me explain to you why they wouldn't have allowed it, Madam Speaker. If anyone knows how our system of democracy works, proposed legislation is approved by the UK government long before it comes here. Long before its arrival here for passage into law. It goes through Cabinet, which has Her Majesty's representative sitting there. And if we think it don't go to England for their nod, then we made a big mistake. Madam Speaker, after being approved here, with all the amendments, the attendant amendments, whatever we do with it, it then goes back to the governor for assent. I may be missing a spot there where it goes to the Attorney General to confirm it and the likes. But that's negligible for the purposes of this discussion. Why was it enacted? That's my question. Why was it assented to with the nod of the United Kingdom if they intended enshrining contrary provisions in the final document called the Cayman Islands Constitutional Order 2009? Madam Speaker, the government is yet to make the case that the UK government intends to introduce same-sex marriage or civil partnership legislation by way of order and council. And I challenge the Premier and any member he has over there to bring it. Madam Speaker, a good friend of mine, I don't think it's only the Premier, has friends in England, I do too. A good friend of mine happens to be on the FAC. As a matter of fact, when the Premier and I were in Cabinet, he visited Cabinet with us. And that was just weeks prior to visiting Turks, which they subsequently shut down. Madam Speaker, Andrew Rosendale has been a member of the FAC for a very long time. He is an MP from Romford. Madam Speaker, last year, FAC, on their own initiative, looked into the FCO and its relationship with overseas territories. And it was entitled Global Britain and the British Overseas Territories, Resetting the Relationships. That was on the 21st of February that committee published its 15th report. The government, like the Premier did this morning, government minute, the government responded. Response was received by the House of Commons on the 29th of April, 2019. Amongst other things that the FCO or the FAC was proposing, many of them about the relationship with, was, and I read, 8 proposal recommendation number 8. The government should set a date by which it expects all OTs to have legalized same-sex marriage. If that deadline is not met, the government should intervene through legislation or an order in council. Madam Speaker, the one dissenting voice to that position of the FAC was my good friend Andrew. One dissenting voice. The UK government, which was right then in the middle of that transition between May and the now Prime Minister Boris Johnson. As a matter of fact, he took over from May and mid-July, and this was ordered to be printed by the House of Commons on the 7th of May, a mere 2 months difference. The government response to that recommendation is as follows. The UK government is committed to equal rights, including LGBT rights. We believe that the strongest, safest, and most prosperous societies are those in which all citizens can live freely without fear of discrimination. And we are all citizens, including LGBT people, can play a full and active part in society. 9 overseas territories have legal recognition and protection for same-sex relationships. At the time of writing, a 10th territory, the Cayman Islands, was granted a stay in the Chief Justice's ruling in favor of same-sex marriage until August 2019, when the government's appeal will be heard. The British overseas territories are separate, largely self-governing jurisdiction with their own democratically elected representatives. Our relationship with the overseas territories is based on partnership, and therefore, as policy on marriage law is an area of devolved responsibility. It should be for the territories to decide and legislate on. Our relation, may I read again? Our relationship with the overseas territories is based on partnership, and therefore, as policy on marriage law is an area of devolved responsibility, it should be for the territories to decide and legislate on. Maybe I didn't understand that when I read it last year. As has been demonstrated by recent LGBT cases, the territory's justice mechanism and processes should be allowed the space to address these matters. We are working to encourage, it said the mechanisms are in place, but that one here too, this one too. We are working to encourage those territories that have not put in place arrangements to recognize and protect same-sex relationships to do so, and continue to engage with all the overseas territories to ensure that their legislation is compliant with their international human rights obligations. LGBT rights and broader human rights obligations are consistently raised with the leaders of overseas territories, both bilaterally and at the Overseas Territories Joint Ministerial Councils. This is also a matter that is raised by governor's offices. Hang on now, this is the key one for you. We have no plans to introduce an order in council on this issue. So I want to know where we are getting this thing that England is going to do it. We are assuming a lot. I would advise the government and its people to stop assuming those things. Because, Madam Speaker, if I know that UK government the people from the UK, they don't send these things by messengers. They put them writing. Haven't we seen that before in the last 20 years? They will let you know. So I don't understand why they would tell the Premier by word of mouth or anyone else that they're going to do it. Now, they're very crafty in their writing. I must tell you that. But, Madam Speaker, the other assertion that I'm hearing is, and this one is laughable, that if we, and the Premier alluded to it this morning, but he won't give me no writing. If we don't introduce legislation, the constitutional changes will not be advanced. Madam Speaker, I say again that the UK has always communicated their position in writing. They have never shied away from letting their position known. Are we to believe that they're now resorting to telling the governor by word of mouth and that's how we got spread it? I don't think so. But, Madam Speaker, if by chance it is so, it is that the UK did express such. My response to that is, so what? What does that have to do with me or this country? If they don't want us to get that constitutional change, so what? We have been operating under this one for 10 years. That's true. And I agree with the Premier. He got his little MBA for doing it, but I agree with him. We have moved the country forward. And if it means I agree we need to move it a little further. We all understand that I did not support Governor coming down here at any given time address this Parliament. And I didn't support the additional minister at this time. And in the fullness of time, we'll get there as time moves on. How often you see the Queen come House of Commons address people? Never. Last time one of those royalty went there, we know what happened with that. Okay. I will never support the governor having the right to come here when he wants. What is he going to do, split this house? Is that what we're looking for? when he cannot get what he wants? He or she can't get what they want? No. I ain't supporting that. No cuckoo. Madam Speaker, it's also proffered in some quarters that the government will use its reserve powers, as per Section 81 of the Constitution, to enact legislation if this legislative assembly fails to do so. Here it seems like that woman, former Governor Kilpatrick, in embedding themselves in this matter that is devolved. I wonder if the Attorney General would explain that to him, since they say I don't understand these words. Devolve. My personal advice to him is to read carefully his responsibilities as it is defined in the Constitution. In addition, if he hasn't, he should familiarize himself with the UK's government's position, which I read earlier.
You want the definition of the word? Can I read the definition of the word?
Madam Speaker, England has a place called Northern Ireland, which has devolved its autonomy on local matters, devolved responsibility on local matters. You know how long it took them to get this done? They even suspended the parliament for three years. The council, I think it's called. You know the controversy that was up there? But we must sit here. Somebody sent me something the other day about being yes man. I can't remember. Madam Speaker, this is a devolved matter that is not covered under his powers or responsibilities. Besides, Madam Speaker, the governor wishes to maintain the goodwill that he has developed over his tenure thus far. It would be wise for him not to involve himself in this emotive issue.
I told him that first time I met him. Yes, sir.
Madam Speaker, the Premier said this is burden of leadership. We know all about that. All of us know about that. What was it we say? Uneasy is the head that wears the crown. Madam Speaker, my colleague helped me with this quote that I saw the other day. Let me read. A yes man is a dangerous man. He's a menace. He will go very far. He can become a minister, a secretary, or a field marshal, but he can never become a leader, nor ever be respected. He will be used by his superiors, disliked by his colleagues, and despised by his subordinates. So discard the yes man. Madam Speaker, we understand this thing called leadership, and the courts have said that, what is it? We have done nothing? Really? Doing nothing is doing something too, you know. We didn't want to change it. We understood. we quite well understood what we were doing. So if the courts think that because they sit over there and we sit here, that we must be at all times directed by them, no, that's not how this works. We too have constituents. And I understand this thing about rule of law. My argument is appeal their decision because they are but human beings too. I wonder who in these hallowed halls would ever think that they can't be wrong. And I must be right across the road from them and borrow in a tunnel to get home past that building. In a country where I buck out my toenails? I gotta be kidding, boy. That ain't happening, Bobo. I said earlier, I will stand and die on my feet over begging on my knees. I have no intentions of doing that. He who wishes to do so, feel free. Because if you think when you get on your knees, you're getting a sword on your shoulder to be anointed, you made a big mistake. It may be on your shoulder to behead you. Madam Speaker, the advancement of our Constitution was, many attempts had been made. I personally were involved in at least 2 of them, so I was intimately involved with them. For the purposes of this debate, I just want to concentrate on the one from during the 2005-9 administration, which culminated in the current Constitution. Madam Speaker, those talks included even the churches. We thought they were so important that we had representatives from the Ministers Association and the Seventh-day Adventists. And God bless his soul, Pastor Allison was there. And Cheyenne O'Connor. Madam Speaker, for the purposes of this discussion, let me read the leader of government business, part of his opening statement. Madam Speaker, this was the 29th of September 2008, right here in Cayman. The leader of government business was Kurt Tippett. I'm telling her, don't make me go in my archives. You know. And he says, and I'm reading part of it, in essence, what we are seeking is a sharing of decision-making responsibility with the United Kingdom. For example, in certain areas where the governor currently has exclusive responsibility, we are asking for these decision-making functions to be shared with the elected government. Oversight of the police, and I stress the word oversight of the police, represents a good example. Caymanians are calling for more accountability from the police because their services are directly funded by the Caymanian taxpayers. However, as it currently stands, the office of the governor has responsibility under the Constitution for oversight of the police to the exclusion of the elected government. Unfortunately, when we walked away, that remained in place. When issue arise, Caymanians look to their elected government for decisive action to represent their interests. But the elected government hands are effectively tied. Except for raising their concerns with the governor, there is nothing else that the elected government can do. The 1972 Constitution does not give the elected government a basis on which to act. It must be apparent that a system which does not allow full public accountability by key organs of the state cannot always be relied upon to ensure the delivery of good governance. We also believe that the Cayman Islands have reached a stage in their development where the composition of the legislature and the cabinet should fully reflect the democratic will of the people. You know what I meant? Subsequent to the end of the Cold War, the world has witnessed a democratic revolution. Countries which were once ruled by dictators, really, are functioning democracies today. Countries which were democratic have enhanced their systems to further empower their people. The United Kingdom has actively supported this worldwide trend of democratization. The presence of non-elected members with casting votes in both the legislature and cabinet goes against the trend of greater democratization. In our legislature, if our legislature is to become truly democratized, it must reflect the will of the people as expressed in their vote at the ballot boxes. Amen. There has been much concern and widespread debate about a Bill of Rights for the Cayman Islands and how it will impact Caymanian culture, values, and morals. After a great deal of public discussion and indeed education, we believe there is now general agreement that we should have a Bill of Rights. Although I should add that there remain some abiding reservations about its inclusion in the Constitution. Hopefully, this particular issue will be resolved during these talks. I should say, however, that support for a Bill of Rights is largely contingent on the content of the bill, as Caymanians are concerned to ensure that it does not permit or encourage or undermine or encourage an undermining of traditional Caymanian values or morals, and that it does not result in bizarre judgments or rulings as have occurred in some other jurisdictions. The government is keenly aware of the local concerns and of the need to ensure that while the Bill of Rights protects the fundamental rights of the individual, that the document should recognize and respect the Cayman context in which it will operate. Over the course of the past months, therefore, we have been working on developing a draft Bill of Rights which is intended to do all of the above. And this morning we will circulate it in the various delegations, to the various delegations present, so that it can serve as the basis for the discussions on the subject over the course of these talks. I wish to pause for a second just to say, we do respect the fact that once it's disseminated, that we will need a little bit of time, Mr. Chairman, for Area 1 to digest its contents. So I will not expect for us to be looking at it early during these talks. This is a crucial issue, and we must strive to get it right. I am satisfied that we can and will. Ladies and gentlemen, these negotiations represent a golden opportunity for us to refashion our system of government, to make it relevant to our times and the foreseeable futures. Let us make the most of it in years to come, long after we have passed from the political scene. Let history applaud us for having the courage and foresight to have done what is right for the Cayman Islands. It is not so much about our future, but that of our children and grandchildren. Let us give them a legacy of which they can be proud. May the Almighty God, who we serve, who has guided and protected the people of these islands since they were first settled more than 300 years ago, guide our deliberations over the coming days. May he fill us with the spirit of compromise and the wisdom to make the right decisions as we seek to establish a constitutional framework for the future. Unquote. Now, that was said by the Honorable Kurt Tippett at the time. The key is, we all wrote it. The Premier was the author, and we were the editors of it. Okay? He was the author, and we were the editors. I know, because I know it sounds better now, Premier, than when you wrote it, because I'm reading it. Madam Speaker, I hear you. Madam Speaker, I can forgive most of those, the Premier colleagues over there, but some of them I'll never forgive. Him I'll never forgive. He knew what it entailed. He might have forgotten. Now that I've reminded him, he needs to keep it in his head. I want to know what happened to all those commitments he and I subscribed to. So I want to know. All I can say is that all those who have gone on before us will be turning in their graves, because I know who they are. But I know I visit my parents often. And they haven't rolled away there. Madam Speaker, I don't know what is going to be the part of this that gets us connected. I don't know. Madam Speaker, let me just say that I want to make this clear. I have no ill will towards anyone. I understand that a long time ago, that hate only bothers me. Half of those you hate don't know you hate them, and the other half really don't care whether you hate them or not. So people are free to do as they please. But when I'm being asked to extend privileges to a sector society, I must question those reasons. Madam Speaker, the people of this country voted to adopt the Constitution that they would be governed by in May of 2009. Enshrined in that Constitution is the right to marry between opposite sex. I believe the people of this country took that to be the end of the matter. It was in keeping with their societal norms, and that's what they voted for in that referendum. Madam Speaker, while I recognize that time has moved on, and like cultures, everything evolves. But I question the rush from this government. One, to adhere to a court declaration that should have been challenged. I'm still puzzled why it was not, because while the appeals court found that marriage was not and must remain between opposite sex, they took it upon themselves to order. And I say that advisedly, that the Legislative Assembly must act expeditiously to legalize protection equivalent to marriage for same-sex couples. It appears like this government shudders at the sight and sound of the courts. Nevertheless, when there's something they strongly believe in, they hasten to preserve the sanctity of the separation of powers. And they spend the people's money to ensure that happens. But in this case, no such thing was done. I question the reason for the rush, Madam Speaker. It appears like the government goes out of its way to appease those who come to our shores, but the very people who they are elected to serve are never paid attention to. For 7+ years now, they have made promises to legislate, to enhance the lives.
Honorable Premier.
Madam Speaker, just a point of clarification, if the member will yield. I simply need to ask him, not me to clarify, for him to clarify that Chantel Day is not a Caymanian woman.
I'll gladly clarify.
Honorable Leader of
I'll
the
gladly
Opposition.
clarify she is, but the other one not. You get the clarification? Answer now again. I wasn't talking about that one. Madam Speaker, that's where I'm going on to. He rushed a little too much. Haste make waste. Madam Speaker, I grew up in this country. This government, Madam Speaker, for the last 7 years have promised the people of this country legislation to enhance their lives. Let's read out some of them. Anti-balloting legislation, not done. Why this now? Pharmacy law, not done. Why this now? Public health law, not done. Why this now? Public libraries law, not done. Why this now? Sexual harassment law, not done. Why this now? Fair Employment Opportunity Commission, not done. Why this now? Amendments to the insurance and regulations, not done. Why this? If all of these could not get done in 7 years, Madam Speaker, I went to the trouble. I tell her, man, don't give me a break, right? I went to the trouble, Madam Speaker, and did the research. I copied every one of those plans and estimates for this government from 2013 with planned legislation, and it plenty of it yet did not get done. I understand the government is busy with the financial services, try to keep the financial industry alive, working, and in the interest of the country, right? I understand that. I have supported it. In every instance, I have supported it. But it seems like they can't multitask. But we can make and do laws. Today's 31 days. 31 days. Really? Madam Speaker, the Premier admitted his government's failures with the insurance law in the throne speech. 7 years. But we can get them done in 30 days. Who you think the insurance law is going to benefit? Caymanians. Who you think the pharmacy law is going to benefit? Caymanians. Who you think the Fair Employment Opportunity Commission is going to benefit? Caymanians. Who do you think the public health law is going to benefit? Caymanians. Who do you think our public libraries law is going to benefit? Our children. First and foremost. And then thereafter, the population in general. Madam Speaker, the Premier mustn't come back. Madam Speaker, the Premier talked about the amount of laws that come and so on. See the rest of them, yeah? Really? Really? Why then didn't we do some of these? Let me explain to you, Madam Speaker. The marriage law has been on legislation that has been proposed for years. Years. But we have done nothing about it. I read these here, Nate, too, for the last 3 weeks. The children law, top graded. The adoption law. The maintenance law. The matrimonial clauses law is scheduled for amendment 2. Mine, you know, Madam Speaker, this law that we got here, that we're proposing, is governed by those laws. In the event something happens here, but we say no marriage, we have to refer it to the marriage law and the matrimonial clauses law and the adoption law and the penal code and the children law. Now, Madam Speaker, let me just touch on a couple of these things here for a bit. And my colleagues can touch on the laws because on the law, this is a moral issue. Our Constitution Section 20 of the Constitution, that he who reads it knows, come near and listen carefully. Oh, you may say that I'm angry. Of course I'm angry. So what's wrong with that? Madam Speaker, I wanted for a minute to look at Section 20 of the Constitution. Talks about education. It says, this section is without prejudice to Section 10. Government shall seek reasonably to achieve the progressive realization within available resources of providing every child with primary and secondary education, which shall be subject to subsection 3, be free. Let's take a look at the education law. Education law, Madam Speaker, says that compulsory education is up to the age of 17. Up to the age of 17. Now let's look education law defines a child as a person under 18. Education law, school age, compulsory is 17. Do we want to look at the domestic partnership bill? Where it says that you can get married. You got to be 18, get married, but your parents can give approval from 16. So here's where we are. A parent can give approval for their 16-year-old to go into domestic partnership, but they still got to be in school. Understand? But that is what we are saying. Same thing as marriage. That's what we are saying. We need to amend these laws. Why have they been on the books for years and not amended and proposed legislation? Now we bring marriage partnership on it too. Let me look at these couple here. No, because I got so many that I researched. I got them all marked up too. Let's look at the matrimonial clauses law. Thank you. Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker. marriage, the definition of children, of a child of marriage, is defined as under 16. Orders for periodic payments is up to 16. 14, I think. Yet, up to 16, and then the court can extend it to 21. That's what we want. Madam Speaker, my argument is that these things needs to be coordinated. For too long, they have been outstanding. All we have done is rush this to make sure we adhere to the wishes and orders of the court, like scampering for cover. Under the maintenance law, another one that has been planned legislation for many years, Section 8. An order of maintenance made under this law shall, in the case of a child, be made to hold good until such child attains the age of 14 years. And in the case of any other person for such period as may be named in the order. For the purpose of this law, purposes of this law, every child under 14 years of age shall be deemed unable to maintain himself or herself for reason of tender years, unless the contrary be shown.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition, you have 10 more minutes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. The marriage law is a mess. So let's not even talk about that. Madam Speaker, I understand that the Premier says that these things are not police law. Appropriate consent under the police law. Child not yet 18 but has reached 14 need consent to do fingerprints. Despite sending this out on the 26th, I did a lot of work. You, Justice Young. Young person, the definition is under the age of 17. They're all conflicting. Why are we not doing something about it? Madam Speaker, then they have gone ahead, like the Premier talked about, and allowed that deputy governor to grant captains. captains on vessels the right to do partnership. Now, Madam Speaker, let's just think about that. How many passenger liners do we have registered in Cayman? We're not going on. The only other type it would be valid for is a cargo vessel that has a few passengers on it. Okay? Mega yachts. Yeah. But they charter them and whatnot. Now, how much them we given license to? Madam Speaker, I am a former seaman. The international rules allow captains to marry, but it got to be opposite sex. All of a sudden, now we're extending it to them. You know what could happen if we get a passenger liner registered in this country? Anybody thought that? You remember when same-sex marriage was legislated in certain states in United States of America? People who go from one state to the next and get married and then come back and demand that there be recognition. This thing, like the court says, is not a universal thing. Are we prepared to engage in that? Is that what we're going to do? And go there and defend it too? Be named in lawsuits of a country? I would advise them to stay away from that. That can become very dirty. Madam Speaker, let me just say, like I said earlier, I grew up in this country. Those of us in here had to grow up in this country. This country, as I know it, and I'm sure all others do too, we have always had sexual orientation different from different sexual orientations in this country. It has always been alleged. Not one of us in here can say that we didn't hear so and so and so and so and so and so. Not one of us can say we didn't hear it. There has never been a bother to us. Never, not once has it been a bother. We know of them in our families, but we could not prove it. Madam Speaker, they have lived out their lives. There are different ways of doing this to give these people who want things like rights to be able to pass on property, do this. There are different ways of doing it. And I'm sure the Attorney General can be creative enough to deal with that. There must be, succession and whatnot. There has to be a different way of doing this. Madam Speaker, the biggest problem we are going to have in this country, and mark my word today, when those rights and those people want those rights extended even further, and it's in the face of the people of this country who doesn't understand that, it's going to cause problem, We see enough problems now with them and us. We see it. Unfortunately, it shouldn't be. But that's what this is leading down. All we are doing is adding pepper and salt, shakers. We got with both our hands full over this us and them. Seasoning it up. There must be some other way this can be done. And I declare there is. Don't think, could never be. We are that besides ourselves that we can't find a different way to deal with this, man. Instead of rushing this here and haven't even changed the consequential laws. Come us. Come on, colleagues. Come on, colleagues. You mean tell me 19 of us in here, 17 now on the floor? Well, the Constitution don't include them two up there. In voting terms. And you're telling me that someone said to me a few weeks ago when I said, uneasy is the head that wears the crown. He said to me, depends if you got something there. Could never be we don't have anything now. We're here to come together and see what we can do about this matter. Yeah, Premier, I got 2 children too, as you well know. 2 boys. We all want to leave our children a legacy that they don't come and dig us out, or exhume us and burn us up. We all want to do that. But in the interest of all, and my good friend and former colleague from Bodden Town, Roy Bodden, and Sundry, you know, his intent was to see you dried out in Cayman. You know. It is in our interest to shut this division, shut this contention down. That is what leadership is about.
We now reached the hour of 4:30. May I have a motion for suspension of standing orders 10-2? Honorable Premier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Order 10-2 in order that the business of the House may continue beyond the hour of interruption.
The question is that Standing Order 10-2 be suspended to enable the business of the House to continue beyond the hour of 4:30. The question is that this House, all those in favor, please say aye. Those against, no. The ayes have it. The House will continue beyond the hour of 4:30. Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Member for Georgetown West.
I could bottle it. Yeah, he bringing it. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to make a contribution to the Domestic Partnership Bill 2020. First of all, before I start, I just want to say that this morning I had 2 members ask me if I still go to church every morning. I say I proudly go to church every morning when I get a chance. I was asked if after today, if I will be able to go tomorrow. I will be going tomorrow with a clear conscience, and if they want to join me, they can join me. Madam Speaker, I'm a realist. I try to live my life as an optimist, but I'm a realist. Madam Speaker, I was raised as a Christian into a Christian family with strong Christian heritage. While none of us are perfect, my principles and beliefs are based on and shaped by Christian values. When I decided to put myself forward for election in the Legislative Assembly, I knew if elected, I would be elected to represent my district, Georgetown West, and ultimately my country, especially as counselor to the ministers. I would be representing a wide variety of constituents with widely different views, and I would have to give full consideration to all views, whether I agreed with them or not. I would be representing all constituents, not just those that I agree with. Having been successful in the general elections, I have made every attempt to get feedback from my constituents, and together with all relevant information and input, I then make decisions based on my best judgment and what I feel is best for them and the country as a whole. Madam Speaker, taking this position does not mean I may have to make compromises. Taking this position does mean I may have to make compromises in some cases. There will be issues where I might not agree on a personal level, but after careful consideration of all input and relevant information and for the greater good, I believe I must vote against what would be my personal position. And having said this, let me be clear that there will be some issues over which I will never compromise my principles and beliefs. This Domestic Partnership Bill 2020 is an example of having to make compromises for what I believe is the good of the country. On a personal level, I would prefer if things remained as they are at present and we could ignore the issue. However, that is not the best way to deal with things, and with this issue, it is clear inaction will not work. We have to deal with this issue and make a decision one way or the other. So I have to take the views of my constituents together with all the relevant information and input and weigh all of this with what I feel is the best for the country. I think it is fair to say more of my constituents that I have heard from would rather we leave things as they are at present, but not all constituents feel that way. I therefore have to take this input and weigh this with what I feel is the best decision for all constituents in our country while not compromising my principles and beliefs. Madam Speaker, I believe that if we do not pass this bill into law, it is inevitable that some form of domestic partnership law will be forced on us. While I might not agree with it or like it, the world seems to be taking the view that if someone wants to, they should be allowed to enter into a domestic partnership. We are a top financial center in the world, and we are very dependent on international visitors and investors. Because of this, we are very dependent on our relations with international jurisdictions and their willingness to do business with us, and we cannot make decisions in a vacuum. Previous generations of Caymanians have fought for and built an incredible Caymanian success story, from the top worldwide reputation of our men that went to sea through to the very sound principles and judgment of our leaders, use in developing our financial and tourism sectors of the economy. A very important part of this success stems from the understanding that we, as a very small island, have never been in a position to stand independent of the rest of the world and only make decisions that we want. Madam Speaker, the vast majority of our consumer products are imported, and our financial industry is completely dependent on the ability to transact business with other jurisdictions. So whether we like it or not, we have to give serious consideration to what the world in general is doing. Madam Speaker, I have a strong understanding of this, especially because of the close relationship I had with my granduncle, Dr. Roy McTaggart. Most people thought he was my grandfather. My grandfather, Dr. Malcolm McTaggart, was Uncle Roy's brother. He died, my grandfather died when my mother was 12. And he was instrumental in putting Uncle Roy through college. The two brothers were very close in business together, and as a result, Uncle Roy, who had no children of his own, treated my mother as his only child and us as his grandchildren. Some of my favorite childhood memories are spending hours with Uncle Roy in his rocking chair on his porch, telling us stories of Cayman history. After the death of his first wife, Aunt Rhoda, we visited him on a daily basis, as he hardly had any other visitors. He looked forward to our visits as much as we enjoyed visiting him. One of the stories he told us many times was the important decision he and his colleagues as lawmakers had to make regarding whether Cayman should remain a British Crown colony. When Cayman made the decision to seek independence from the UK, Cayman was given the choice of remaining as a British Crown colony or change to internal self-government. I remember him telling us of the hard work he undertook to visit every district of the island to get the feedback. He went from one end of the island to the other. The overwhelming majority of the feedback he got was to remain a British Crown colony, you know. A British Crown colony. However, he was the only one of his colleagues who agreed with this. It was only after he made an impassioned speech at a meeting of the Assembly where the decision was being debated that his colleagues were convinced to remain as a British territory. He explained the beliefs of this decision to us, and as time passed, it became more and more clear what a massive impact this decision had made on the success of these islands. He was later honored as a national hero, largely because of this stand. Although there were many other stories he told us of very strong decisions and actions he took, which were decisive in how these islands developed. I say all of this to say that I place a very high importance on our status on the international stage and how we achieve this. I believe our current international status is vital to the continued economic success of these beloved islands, Cayman. Therefore, I believe we have to take into account what is happening in the rest of the world. And although we may not agree with everything, we will have to create a balance between what we are willing to make a compromise on and accept, and what issues we will not compromise on. Madam Speaker, I believe this government has done a very good job creating a law that as far as possible accomplishes this. It generally provides that two consenting adults may enter into a legal contract to form a domestic partnership, which will provide a number of benefits and protections such as under the immigration law, the maintenance law, the national pensions law, the succession law, and the wills law, among other laws. It also provides protection for those who, because of their religious or other beliefs, would not want to participate under this law. It does a good job of protecting both those who want to form a partnership under this law as well as allowing others a freedom of conscience. I am not a lawyer, but I believe right now 2 consenting adults can enter into a legal contract which could specify what that partnership would consist of. This bill will add protection and rights under the relevant laws, including those I mentioned, to such a contract. By offering these protections and rights, I believe we are giving those who want to enter into a domestic partnership what they need and want. Madam Speaker, this bill deals with 2 consenting adults who wish to enter into a legal agreement which governs the terms and conditions of the partnership it creates. It does not bring a religious aspect into it, and I believe it should not. Right now, 2 consenting adults who happen to be atheists can go to the courts and be married. As far as they are concerned, there is no religious aspect to this at all. Under this bill, this could now be formalized as a domestic partnership, and they will have the same rights and protection under the relevant laws as they currently have. What this bill will formalize is that 2 consenting adults of the same gender will also be allowed to enter into a domestic partnership and also receive the rights and protections under the relevant laws. I believe this law makes the best of what I could call a difficult situation. As mentioned, I would prefer that there would not be a need to introduce this bill, but after I have given careful consideration to the feedback and information I have received, and it's 3 ways, as the Premier says, and you have to pick and choose which one. I mean, if you pick one, there's 2 other groups that are going to be upset. So I have to go with my conscience of what I think is best for the future of Cayman and balance this with what I believe is the best interest of our country. I am convinced this government has arrived at the best possible compromise. Madam Speaker, bearing in mind that if we do not act and introduce this legislation, there is every chance we will be forced to accept legislation that is less acceptable to us. And this bill does not attempt to make this a religious issue, but rather one of personal choice. I believe that for the greater good of our country and all our people, this is something that I, in good conscience, can support. Thank you, Madam Speaker. By me.
Does any other member wish to speak? Honourable Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to give my contribution in Domestic Partnership Bill 2020. Madam Speaker, I represent Cayman Brac West and Little Cayman. As most people know, the last 3 months, my colleague and I were in Cayman Brac, and it gave us time to talk, to listen, to enjoy. And I can assure you, Madam Speaker, that the view that we heard, the view of my constituents is that marriage is between a man and a woman. Madam Speaker, this view was upheld in the Constitution, which was revised in 2009 and duly passed. Section 14(1) of the Bill of Rights in the Constitution clearly denotes that a marriage, again, is between persons of the opposite
sex. It says, government shall respect the right of every unmarried man and woman of marriageable age as determined by law, freely to marry a person of the opposite sex and found a family. Madam Speaker, those words were deliberately included in the Constitution, and they are there to provide assurances to Caymanians that marriage would retain its traditional definition as the union between one man and one woman. Now, Madam Speaker, in most countries, when you talk about the Constitution, it's very unusual that you actually have the framers present. But as you look around this honorable chamber, Madam Speaker, framer, a framer, framer, you were the driving framer, I would have to say. I think the leader of the opposition. But you have members here, myself, you have members here that clearly were involved in framing the Constitution in 2009 and understand that there's no confusion about what it was meant to say. The fact that the Constitution went through the required democratic process and was passed by majority in a referendum gives us as legislators in this House the assurance that it not only reflects the framers, but the majority of Caymanians that voted. Madam Speaker, the issue of domestic partnerships stirs up strong emotions within the hearts and minds of our people, and that is because it is a matter that affects the lives of real people who are our neighbors, our family, and our friends. Consequently, the issue being debated is not just about LGBT community or confined to those who wish to live an alternative lifestyle. It is about the definition and interpretation of marriage as is defined in our Constitution, which the majority of our people agreed to. Madam Speaker, as elected representatives, we should do all we can to protect the spirit, the intent of what people voted on, and that is that the institution of marriage can only be between a man and a woman. Now, the question of the shortness of time and the consultation, Madam Speaker, I'm not going to read any of these, but with your permission, I would just like to name them, because this is a handful, but there were a stack of representations that I'm sure each member here got. And the representation was for thousands of people. And I don't think there's a lot of magic to which side of this divide these different representations sat on. The Ministers Association wrote the Leader of the Opposition. They also wrote the Honorable Ellen McLaughlin, Premier. So their representation was well circulated, well documented, well received, and much appreciated. Madam Speaker, colors Cayman. I believe we understand that there's a fence in the middle, and their representation, again, was thorough. It represented their thoughts, and it gave each of us the ability to look and understand how they felt. And that's extremely important to every person in this House, that this representation was provided for us, and the idea of consultation with the community has been satisfied, I believe, for every member here if they took the time to read the amount of representation that was sent. Madam Speaker, Amplify Cayman. Again, much appreciated that they took the time not only to speak to people, but to write and document thoughts. We appreciate that. Madam Speaker, Domestic Partnership Bill in the Cayman Islands. This is from the Caribbean cause. So not only did we get representation locally, the Caribbean cause is a group of individuals and churches from 17 Caribbean territories, including the Cayman Islands, is issuing the communique in order to express concerns. I believe every member got this, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, the last one I brought with me is the Christian Association for Civics and Political Education. Again, much appreciated, well documented, 5 typewritten, small type pages, and appreciated. Madam Speaker, I took the time just to share that with you, with colleagues, and with the listening public, to let them understand that this is a sampling of what we got, along with the conversations from our constituents and our communities and the understanding of where we were and the necessity for this legislation. Madam Speaker, many countries across the world have wrestled with this issue for years. Most have conceded that while the reasons for marriage being between a man and a woman are logical and compelling, there's a need still from the perspective of human rights, equality, and justice to recognize the rights of all people to legally formalize relationship. Madam Speaker, based on the representation that has been made to individual members of this House, I'm assured that my colleagues are aware of the strong sentiment that exists, and I use the example on both sides. But we are also aware that there are sectors of our community that are very supportive of civil-type unions, domestic partnerships. And by the rule of law, the European Convention of Human Rights has ruled that same-sex couples have a right to legally be recognized in partnerships which provide similar rights and privileges afforded to traditional marriage. Madam Speaker, the Cayman Islands is a signatory to the European Convention of Human Rights, and as such, our signature obliges this legislation to enact a framework. And I'm trying not to share an emotional side because I'm trying to read out the law as I understand it, and as they say, you play the hand you've been dealt. Introducing this domestic partnership bill is therefore a way forward. And why? Because it allows us to protect the intention of our Constitution in keeping the sanctity and definition of marriage intact, while at the same time providing the legal and financial benefits to alternative lifestyle couples wanting to formalize commitment to one another. If we as legislators fail to put the necessary framework in place to provide this balance and make accommodation for domestic unions to take place, it will be only a matter of time before the UK exercises its right to institute an order in council and impose laws permitting same-sex marriage in the Cayman Islands. The UK's affirmative stance with respect to civil partnerships was established almost 2 decades ago. On the 30th of June 2003, the United Kingdom government first published its proposals for civil partnership in England and Wales. Later that same year, the Scottish executive announced its intention to introduce civil partnership in Scotland. It became law in England and Wales. The UK's Civil Partnership Act received royal assent in November of 2004 and was subsequently introduced into law shortly thereafter. 10 years later, the marriage Same-Sex Couples Act of 2013 was introduced in England and Wales, making marriage indiscriminately available to all couples irrespective of gender. Madam Speaker, that is the type of law that we can expect if we allow the UK to legislate on our behalf. I believe it's quite clear what their law represents, and there's no reason to believe that it would be any different when they legislate for us. When that happens, and I say when because there's no doubt in my mind that the UK will force the Cayman Islands to fulfill our obligations under the ECHR. If the people of this country refuse to accept relationships between same-sex couples enshrined in law, we'll be left with one course of action. That is to withdraw from our historical alliance with the United Kingdom and become a sovereign nation. But, Madam Speaker, I say to you today, that's not an option. Not at this time in our history. Closer to home, Bermuda introduced its Domestic Partnership Act in 2018 and was among the first English-speaking Caribbean islands to do so. Their law grants same-sex heterosexual couples wishing to enter into a domestic partnership the same rights and benefits equivalent to those of married couples. In the United States Virgin Islands, following a decision by the United States Supreme Court in 2015, the governor of the islands issued an executive order directing all government agencies and departments to recognize, permit, and facilitate same-sex marriages in the United States Virgin Islands. Madam Speaker, I mention these examples to illustrate that inasmuch as the Cayman Islands Constitution says that marriage is between a man and a woman, the only chance we have of keeping our Constitution in that way is by assenting to a domestic partnership. The government has already been taken to court on this issue. We fought an appeal. And Madam Speaker, although we won the appeal with respect to the ruling of the Chief Justice, the appeals court imposed an obligation on this government to expeditiously provide a legal framework equivalent to marriage for persons in the same-sex relationship. The appeals court imposed an obligation on this government. I just wanted to repeat that. If we fail to do so, this legislative assembly would be in violation of Article 8 of the European Convention of Human Rights, entitled The Right to Respect for Private and Family Life. And it states, everyone has the right to respect for his private and family life, his home, and his correspondence. There shall be no interference by a public authority with the exercise of this right, except such as in accordance with law and necessary in a democratic society. Arguing this issue back and forth and pursuing remedy in the courts has not only proven to be costly, but extremely time-consuming. Continuing to debate it is basically just delaying the inevitable. One way or another, provision will be made to facilitate domestic unions in the Cayman Islands. I've touched on some of the facts to support that. In the face of this, I believe that it is far better for us, the 19 elected members of this honorable House, to put legislation in place that we have drafted and that we believe is the best way forward for the people of our country, than to delay, continue to disagree, and have the United Kingdom impose a law on this issue that they believe is appropriate for us. Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to see that the bill does not mandate that marriage officers and preachers must officiate over a domestic ceremony. In the same way that human rights laws grant certain rights to same-sex couples, they must also protect the rights of people with strong views or objections to the same-sex domestic unions and look for a balance. By giving marriage officers a choice, we are preserving and respecting their right to consciously object on the basis of their religious convictions in accordance with Article 9 of the European Convention on Human Rights, which is entitled Freedom of Thought, Conscience, and Religion, and states everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes freedom to change his religion or belief and freedom to manifest his religion or belief in worship, teaching, practice, and observance. With that said, Madam Speaker, there are parts of the Domestic Partnership Bill that I do question. Clause 3 of the bill states, 2 persons may enter into a domestic partnership under the legislation if either person is 16 years of age or older, but under the age of 18, and the person's parent, legal guardian, or court consents to the domestic partnership in accordance with this law. How can it be that a young person under 18 years is not considered mature enough to vote, to legally consume alcohol, but at 16, with parental consent, they can enter into a domestic partnership with all of its ensuing implications? That inconsistency has to be examined, Madam Speaker, to be more keeping with the age of consent that exists, drinking, voting, and I'm sure that the Premier on his wind-up will explain how this can be addressed and how we can move forward with sorting this part of it out. Madam Speaker, and for marriages as well. So you'd have to change, as leader of the opposition said, you had to change the marriage law and this law. Madam Speaker, this bill is fundamentally about fairness and choice. It is part of the government's commitment to promote equity and human rights. The Court of Appeals has directed the Legislative Assembly to obey the law and respect the decisions of the court. The court declared that legal protection equivalent to marriage be provided for same-sex couples in the Cayman Islands. In absence of expeditious action by the Legislative Assembly, the court expects the UK government to take action to bring this matter to an end. Again, Madam Speaker, with your permission, I would just like to read the conclusion of the appeal judgment. This is, permission? Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Deputy Registrar of the Cayman Islands, the Attorney General of the Cayman Islands, and Chantel Day, Vicky Bodden-Bush, as respondents. Madam Speaker, in the conclusion of this appeal, we well understand how and why the Chief Justice reached the decision he did. However, for the reasons we have set out, we have been driven to conclude this appeal must be allowed. Means the government won the appeal. We set aside the orders made by the Chief Justice in the circumstances. It is not necessary to consider whether the orders be made under Section 5 of the constitutional order were appropriate. As we said in paragraph 6, the appellants have finally accepted the Section 9(1) of the Human Rights requires the Legislative Assembly to provide the respondents with legal status functionally equivalent to marriage. Its failure to comply with its obligation under the law. Its failure to comply with its obligation under the law in that regard is woeful. That it had such an obligation has been apparent for several years. As the Chief Justice set out in detail, the respondents, in broad terms, offered to compromise the present litigation on appropriate undertakings from the appellants, us, to establish an institution of civil partnership. Even now, when during the course of argument, the court sought information as to what the appellants intended to do, we were merely told they were awaiting the outcome of litigation. It is difficult to avoid the conclusion that the Legislative Assembly has been doing all it can to avoid facing its legal obligation. In the meantime, Ms. Day, Ms. Bush suffer in many ways, as the Chief Justice set out. So that says, in their words, that we did not do what we were legally obligated to do. In our judgment, a declaration in the following form is appropriate. In recognition, the long-standing, continuing failure of the Legislative Assembly of the Cayman Islands to comply with its legal obligation under Section 9 of the Bill of Rights, and its recognition of the Legislative Assembly's long-standing and continuing violation of Article 8 of the European Convention of Human Rights, it is declared that Chantal Day and Vicky Baden-Bush are entitled to expeditiously legal protection in the Cayman Islands, which is functionally equivalent to marriage. It is not appropriate to require undertakings from the Attorney General, as is urged upon us by respondents. Moreover, proper fulfillment of its legal duty by the Legislative Assembly should provide protection sought. A final observation. We feel driven to make this final observation. The court is an arm of government. Any constitutional settlement requires the executive and the legislative to obey the law and respect the decisions. It would be wholly unacceptable for the declaration to be ignored, whether or not there is an appeal to the Privy Council in respect of same-sex marriage. There can be no justification for further delay. Moreover, in the absence of expeditious action by the Legislative Assembly, we would expect the United Kingdom government to recognize its legal responsibility and take action to bring this unsatisfactory state of affairs to an end. The 3 appeal court judges. Madam Speaker, what that basically says, in a democracy, we have the judicial, the executive, and the legislature. And each have to respect the other for the rule of law to work. The appeal, in my opinion, looked at an overreach from the judicial, and it corrected that. But it also gave guidelines and directives under the law that we have to abide by, or then we have a lawless state. Madam Speaker, they're clearly laid out in the appeal, and I can only say that I hope that the options for us, we would save marriage is between a man and a woman, the right to found a family. We would save that in our Constitution, and our Constitution would not be touched, and we would provide the legal framework for the domestic partnerships that we have been, by law, guided to do. Therefore, Madam Speaker, I'll be supporting this bill, as I believe it to be the only way for protecting our islands from the certainty of an order in council from the UK government, which would give us, the people, no say in what the legislation is. Madam Speaker, I thank you for the time this afternoon.
Does any other member wish to speak? I recognize the member for Northside.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to make my contribution to the debate on the domestic partnership bill. So I intend to do what I usually do, debate the merits and the demerits of the bill before this Legislative Assembly. I am not equipped nor ordained to make judgments on people's choices or behaviors, or to pass judgments on whether a minority of my constituents are morally correct or in keeping with God's laws as detailed in the Holy Bible. Madam Speaker, I understand, appreciate, and respect the legal rulings of our appeal court and the consequences thereof. But, Madam Speaker, everybody in this House knows what Ezra Miller's position is on civil partnerships. I have declared it over and over and over. One of the reasons I was thrown out as leader of the opposition was because I was man enough, brave enough to go out and repeat in public what my personal position was. My personal position is that I believe we have an obligation as members of this assembly to protect the minority, whether that be on the basis of sexual orientation, color of skin, gender, or any other social, economic bias that might creep in. Madam Speaker, my preference would have been if we were debating and created civil unions with civil registrars under the court, which meant we had a complete and separate system from that prescribed in our marriage law. I would also have been happier with a much longer consultation period. And if both the civil union legislation and the existing marriage law had been sent to a select committee to review the marriage law and to provide, as the courts have ordered, a legal framework that is equivalent to marriage. Now, Madam Speaker, we are told repeatedly that marriage is a religious ceremony ordained by God. And that we want to keep that separate. But, Madam Speaker, that ceremony does not grant unto the people who decided to get married the rights, the civil benefits that the marriage law provides for those people. Without the marriage law, they couldn't claim any of those rights under the law. And all I have always advocated for is keep the marriage law separate, keep our constitution how it is, but provide a legal alternative that provides those equivalent benefits for those persons in our society who make a choice to do something different. So, Madam Speaker, As I said, I declared my position on this several years ago. I have been in constant consultation with members of the public for at least 6 years. When the people in Northside elected me in 2017, they knew what my position was on civil unions. And while I will admit that I didn't make it a make or break, or I didn't list it in a manifesto which I didn't produce as one of the things that I expected to accomplish, they knew what my position was. But, Madam Speaker, as I always do, I had a meeting, a public meeting, in the District of Northside. And I have to thank the Premier and his government for lifting some of the COVID restrictions the week before, which allowed me to have a gathering up to 50 people, which would have been unusual for Northside to get 50 people to come out to a public meeting to discuss in a legislation. We usually average around 25 or 30 or so, depending on how many people come from other constituencies because their representative is not having a meeting to explain it to them. That meeting took place last Thursday night, the 23rd of July. I had in-house 18 persons present, 19 persons present on Zoom, and a number of people were watching it because it was being streamed. We had a frank, open discussion for 2.5 hours, close to 3 hours, on the merits of the bill. I tried to explain to those present what was contained in the bill, what I believe was the objective of the bill. And many of those who opposed the bill, when pressed, would agree that we need to do something for these people. But they have no alternative proposal. I too, like the member from the Deputy Premier, have a stack of written submissions from various people and organizations. One of them in particular is frightening and alarming to me. But in all of that, not a single one offered an alternative. Only one person actually discussed the bill and offered certain input into the pros and cons of the bill and made certain recommendations of what could be done with the bill. At the end of the night, we took a vote. We had 9 people, including those people on Zoom, voted for me not to support the bill, and 8 people voted for me to support the bill. Since that, people who were involved contacted me, and the number has now changed to 17 people to support the bill and 13 people not to support the bill. But if you do the numbers, Madam Speaker, you will see that on the night that I took the vote, some 20 people did not vote. So, Madam Speaker, I don't have the comfort that some people might have in saying that there's an overwhelming majority, loud though it may be, against this legislation. So, I believe I have to act as their representative and do what I believe is best for the country. Now, Madam Speaker, one of my dilemmas in trying to engage the people who are opposed to this bill is that they got everything they want. The Constitution is intact. The marriage law is intact. The bill protects the religious institutions. People who wish to go into a domestic partnership, although they may have been raised in a church, although they may be the person who is financially supporting the church, they cannot go to the church and demand that the ceremony take place in the church. The preachers who are marriage officers, and by the way, Madam Speaker, I noticed in the marriage law that the only preachers who should be registered as marriage officers are those who have a congregation. And I'm not so sure that some of the people that I know call themselves preachers or are registered as marriage officers have a congregation. But be that as it may. But the law also protects the ministers, but it gives them the right to refuse to perform a domestic partnership ceremony. So, what more do they want? Is it just simply that their Christian beliefs, upbringing, and training is such that they feel no empathy? They don't believe that these people should have any rights at all in this country? Because, Madam Speaker, those who have threatened me loud that if I vote for this bill, they're not going to support me in the next election, I say to them, I have no proof of knowing that you supported me in the past. I got my doubts that you did, and I'm really not expecting you to support me in the next coming election. Because one of the things that I have to wrestle with myself, given my personal Christian beliefs, is would I want to represent a society in which they do not believe that minorities such as these should have any rights at all? Because that's tough for me to accept, the way I was raised. So that's a personal battle I have to fight. But I believe that in my community, and I believe that I know the North Side community as well as most, and a lot more than some who coming up there, because that night vote, was not a North Sider. Two of them that made up the 9 were not North Siders. But they came to my meeting because their representatives was having a meeting. So I allowed them to vote. But, Madam Speaker, I believe when I look at the wider community that I have a greater responsibility to accept that those people who feel that way about this minority in my community and the wider Cayman are actually in the minority, and I can win an election without them. But this is not about an election for me. This is about doing what I believe is right for the people, what I believe is right for the country, and what I believe is right for the ultra-right Christian fanatics who take this hard line and will take one verse in a chapter in the Bible and in isolation to prove that everything we're doing here is wrong. I got a whole list of verses from the Bible. And most of those verses contained sins and discretions that were equally bad as same-sex relations. But they were ignored. The only thing they wanted to draw my attention to was what they regarded was referring to homosexuality. And that is their choice, Madam Speaker. I don't hold that against them. But Madam Speaker, I said I was going to deal with the bill, and that's what I'm going to do. Now, Madam Speaker, I have filed a number of amendments with your office, and I think you have waived the 3-day notice and have accepted them. So, Madam Speaker, as I said earlier, I would prefer if the bill was called a civil union rather than a domestic partnership. So I have filed an amendment to change the name. And everybody in this parliament knows that I don't like clause 2, subclause 2 of clause 1. This law comes into operation on such day as cabinet may appoint by order. I don't like that. So I filed an amendment to say this law comes into operation on or before 31st of December 2020. Madam Speaker, like the Deputy Premier, I too have serious concerns about 16-year-olds, but I listened very carefully to the Honourable Premier explanation for that, and that is what is contained in the current marriage law. One of the other things that troubles me about this law, Madam Speaker, is what I would term the confounding bureaucracy, and double 2 or 3 times you got to get approval to do anything. I find that it could be onerous in clause 7.1, where it says if 2 persons intend to enter into a domestic partnership, one of them shall appear personally before the registrar and give notice in the prescribed form the intended domestic partnership. I have filed an amendment to remove the requirement to personally appear and to say that one of them shall make application to the registrar. One of the other concerns in that same clause, Madam Speaker, is clause 7.2d. The partnerships are not within the prohibited degrees of a domestic partnership, or if they are, a court order has been made under paragraph 4 of Schedule 1 dispensing with the prohibition. I don't see why the courts can order what we have prohibited to go into a domestic partnership. So I would like to hear an explanation for that. I haven't filed an amendment for that because I'm not sure. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not sure what the ramifications are and why it's there. I also, Madam Speaker, find it rather onerous in clause 8.1b, where the notice has to be 14 days when the current marriage law says 7. So I've filed an amendment to change that 14 to 7 days. I'm also concerned with clause 8.1c, where it says within 5 working days of the receipt of the notice of intended domestic partnership, cause a notice in the prescribed form to be published twice and in a newspaper or local media published and circulated in the islands. I disagree with that. I think that's a onerous, unnecessary requirement in the bill, and I would like to see it follow, since we are supposed to be similar to the marriage law, the proposal in the marriage law, where the notice is published on a public notice board, or in some cases, I believe you can publish your banns now in the marriage officer's office as well. So I have filed an amendment to change that. 9, I've also to reduce that 14 days to 7 days. Then, Madam Speaker, the total number of amendments I had was actually 32, but I have tried to shorten them by doing a omnibus thing with the use of the word deputy governor. I don't understand why we are expecting the deputy governor to be so involved in the administration of this. Is it a fact that we know he doesn't have anything to do and he needs something to do? Because one of the things that I want to do, I'm asking for amendments, is to change everywhere that deputy governor is involved in administration, to change that to registrar. Except in section 9, which I agree should be the deputy governor, because that has to do with the appointment of the registrar and the deputy registrar. But all the other things, every time we say the deputy governor must do something, he has to go to the registrar to get his advice or consult the registrar. That's just unnecessary bureaucracy. We should appoint people who are registrars who are capable of administering the law. And I would like to see all of those functions fall to the registrar. Again, and as a consequential amendment to the earlier amendment about the 14 and 7 days, clause 13(2)(a) would have to be reduced to 7 days as well. Don't have a problem with the 14 days in 13 suborder 6B, because that is something that cabinet does in terms of naming a place where this domestic partnership can take place. And some of the clauses, like 10(3), would have to be deleted if we accept the idea that the registrar should administer the law and not the deputy governor after consultation with him. Madam Speaker, under Part 5, I really haven't filed an amendment for this, but I don't understand why the caveats can't be the same as the marriage, where you just ask, does anybody object to this union? And if nobody says anything, you fine, go ahead. We have a whole filing system here that has to be kept for records and kept in track of, et cetera, under Section 5 called caveats. And whether judges have to take these caveats into consideration or not. Now, Madam Speaker, one of the things that I find curious again is in 21(2) clause, the concluding phrase on that after C says, and the registrar shall give a copy of the statement to the parties to the domestic partnership. I filed an amendment to change that statement to certificate, because what's the difference? If we're giving a certificate to the marriage people, give a certificate to the domestic partnership people as well, not some kind of 4, 5, 6-page written statement which has to be written in the Queen's English or something else. Another thing that concerns me, Madam Speaker, given the minority of this group, and if we under Section 22, where we are creating a domestic partnership register that any member of the public can go and search and make notes from. I have some concerns about that because that's going to be a register that some people might have the wrong reasons to want to search. I mean, I think in the marriage law you can go and get a marriage certificate, but I don't think that there's a register that I can go in and search for anybody that I want to see whether they're married or not. If it's only referring to whether in electronic format or not, is that I can go in and ask for if a certain person is involved in a domestic partnership and ask for a copy of that certificate. But I can live with that. But if any member of the public can go in and search the register, I have some concerns about that and some fears that it could lead to abuse. Well, the names and everything else will be on the register. Yeah, I know it's in the law, but I don't think that if this is intended, Madam Speaker, to operate like the marriage register, I don't have a problem with it. But if it's going to be something that, that you can search and people can, how shall I say it, look for the wrong reasons, I have some concerns about it. Again, I have filed an amendment because it's a little more than just, that's clause 22. In clause 26, 2, where it says the deputy governor, after consulting with the registrar, may cancel a person's appointment as a domestic partnership officer if the deputy governor is no longer satisfied with respect to the person as to the matters set out in section 25(2), right? The deputy governor shall not cancel a person's appointment of domestic for consulting with the et cetera, et cetera. I'd like to change that to say that the registrar may cancel a person's appointment of a domestic partnership officer if the registrar is no longer satisfied with respect to the person as to any of the matters set out in section 25(2). Because I don't see the sense of going up to the top floor and coming back down to the second floor and going up to the top floor and coming back down to the second floor. Madam Speaker, I've done some talking to, I come from a maritime family, and I've done some talking to people in accordance with Part 11, Maritime Domestic Partnerships. And I know that the shipping registry, I think, has been advocating for this for quite some time as a method of attracting cruise ships to register in Cayman. But we did the same thing with a gambling law. And I don't think we got any cruise ships by doing that. Because from the maritime people that I talk to, the problem with the Cayman register as related to cruise ships has nothing to do with minor things like this. It has to do with important matters as to the standards of the crew and whether they can actually qualify under the rate ensign requirements, which we are a rate ensign maritime registration. And many of the people that they have crewing on those ships do not have sufficient licensure. And the cruise ships are not going to change that because it's all about money for them. And they can hire them people from up there in the Far East with whatever qualification they have for a lot less then they can hire a Cayman or an English person who has rate ensign qualifications. So I have more than an amendment to delete Part 11, right? Because I really don't see, and I have some other questions. I mean, if we look at the itinerary, the definition of high seas means all parts of the sea that are not included in the territorial sea of the international waters of a state of territory. If we look at the cruise ships in this territory, there's very few places that they're going to be in international waters. Very few. Because most countries in the region here claim 200 miles. And there's maybe down in the, for a little couple of square miles in the Gulf, there might be 200 miles from the surrounding area, but certainly between here and Cuba, between here and Jamaica, between Jamaica and Cuba, between Haiti and Cuba, between Bahamas and Cuba, they're going to be in somebody's territorial waters. And if what that means is that our licensed domestic partner officers on these boats can only marry in international waters, it could be very, very difficult to control that amongst the cruise ships that in this area. I mean, that's not saying that they're the only cruise ships that could register on our registry. I also have serious concerns about being able to police it and whether somebody who claims to have gone through a domestic partnership ceremony by a Caymanian licensed domestic partnership officer, and there's some disagreement, how do we settle it? What kind of records are we demanding that these domestic registered officers on ships keep? And how quickly do they have to communicate those records to Cayman in order for us to be? So I just think that there's too many ifs, ands, and buts, and too many opportunities to expose us for liability that we might not want to take on. That's the kind of advice I am getting from the maritime people in my family. In clause 26.2, to go back a little bit, we have a similar situation where we need to change a few more words than they. No, I think I dealt with that already, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, am I happy with this legislation? No. There's quite a few changes I would like to see made to it. Am I convinced that is the right thing for the government to do? Yes. Am I convinced that it is a reasonable attempt to provide some protections for this minority group in our country? Yes. Do I believe that this domestic partnership bill provides the kind of protections that the religious groups have been asking for in terms of protection of their sanctuaries, in terms of their ministers being able to say, I am not going to get involved in a domestic partnership and certifying a domestic partnership without being sued? I think it does all of that. I think the bill protects our current constitutional position and as we define marriage. And I think the bill provides a reasonable, sensible, alternative legal framework to a marriage for people who decide otherwise. And Madam Speaker, while I say that this is a minority, worldwide statistics indicate that 1 in every 8 persons have homosexual tendencies. So do the numbers. Right? And that's, you know. So, Madam Speaker, We have always had these people in our society, in our families, and I don't believe that up until this point there is any real hard evidence of any kind of serious victimization or mistreating of these people. There have been one or two murders that some people believe that was a problem. But this is a changing world. And the number of Caymanians, like in every other thing, who are in these kind of relationships is increasing. Or whether they're increasing, they're becoming more public, should I say, right? I don't necessarily think that the percentage of the population has increased, but certainly people feel they are free to come out in public, as they say, right? And we need to provide the ability for these people to access things like health insurance, pensions, immigration rights for their partners, but they don't happen to be Caymanian. And to try to do that in all the separate laws. How are we going to do that? If we don't create something, a title. Right now, we do that in all those laws by using the word marriage based on the marriage law. And this bill promotes to do some of that by having common meanings to a domestic partner, married, etc. And the law is to be read as if those words are there. Because how are we going to mend the health insurance law to say that if I'm in a relationship, my partner, I can tell my employer they have to insure my partner? What word are we going to put there if we don't have this kind of framework with which to back it up? Because it can't be, it just happens to be my girlfriend, because I had plenty of them. And if every one of them could make claims that on what little I have, there wouldn't be much left in about it. So when we say that we can do this and we can do that, right? I believe that we have to have some kind of legal framework which identifies this group of people so that we can put those in the legislation. And one of the discussions I had with one of the pastors, was, and of course his position was that marriage is sanctified by God. And I don't dispute, I don't disagree. I've been married twice. I didn't get married in a church at the time. Right? And I was raised in a church. But when I say to him, well, so we don't need a marriage law then. Because if this institution of marriage is so powerful and such a sanctified thing, why don't you all just pray about it? And God will grant it. You don't need a marriage law. So if you don't need this for those people, then should we repeal the marriage law too? Of course, I'm not advocating that in any way. I was just trying to get dialogue and try to get him to move from his position of granite, right? That is religious. And without the marriage law, the religious ceremony doesn't give you anything in terms of your rights on the law. But I wasn't very successful in that argument. But my position is, as it has been from time I can remember, we keep our marriage law intact. We keep our constitutional provisions about marriage between a man and a woman intact. But we create a legal entity which allows people of the same sex to access some of the social and legal benefits in our country that we provide for everybody else. And I believe that this piece of legislation does that. And Madam Speaker, I will be voting for the legislation. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak? Honorable Minister of Commerce.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to give a short contribution to the Domestic Partnership Bill. Let me start by saying that I appreciate and I thank the Honorable Premier for perhaps allowing us to debate a little more on our personal feelings rather than having to carry or represent the views of the government on this bill. Madam Speaker, the bill isn't an instrument to encourage civil unions or same-sex marriages. But, Madam Speaker, this bill provides basic human rights to those who choose to enter into same-sex marriage or civil unions, whether, Madam Speaker, it is in a romantic or even a platonic relationship. As Honorable Premier said this morning, this bill is not about rights or wrongs of any particular lifestyle, but what it is an opportunity for individuals who choose to enter into these partnerships to have those basic rights that are afforded to those of us who enter into traditional marriages. I am also aware that not all of these relationships or partnerships are of a romantic nature. I know of elderly couples who have joined together in late stages of their life as friends, as companions, and end up sharing and being that individual who stays with them, comforts them at the end of their lives. I'm also aware of same-sex individuals who have developed partnerships of a platonic nature to go through life, to travel together, they purchase accommodations or real estate together, have both in their midlives decided that they don't see themselves entering into traditional marriage or into a relationship and have, for whatever reason, chosen to develop a partnership of sorts in a platonic relationship. Madam Speaker, it is in these circumstances that this bill will allow individuals in whatever, or should I say, two consenting adults, for whatever reason they choose to enter into a civil union, will have the ability to plan a life together, to know that there's someone there that will be able to make an end-of-life decision for them if necessary, to be able to participate as a partnership for the basic human rights that are afforded to them, and only to persons, as we have written the laws, only to persons that are in some sort of partnership. Madam Speaker, I'm not going, or I should say that this issue surrounding civil unions is not going to go away, Madam Speaker. It has been here from my time within the government for the almost 8 years that I've been here now. This is not like COVID, that we can just shut the borders and suppress it until it disappears. This is not going to disappear. Madam Speaker, in history, there were many things that were deemed okay or accepted that were not right. As far back as slavery, which was once accepted across the world. Prejudice towards people of color. Madam Speaker, over in Heroes Park, we have a monument that celebrates when women were allowed to vote, not so long ago, right here in the Cayman Islands. And no. In local history, in more recent history, locally, there was a time when we were prejudiced against Rastafarians entering the country. There was a landmark case where Rastafarians were not accepted in our schools. We have resisted over the years and looked at other persons of other religious groups or beliefs as if they were not or should not have the right to believe in whatever they believe in. Madam Speaker, segregation, prejudice, these things are things of the past. The world will not put up with them any longer. It has become unacceptable. We have written it in our Constitution. It's unavoidable. We have got to deal with it. It is, Madam Speaker, I know that we all want, or we start out life and we grow up in a Christian environment, in a church environment. Then we get married, we have children. And then we want to see our children grow up, get a good education, enter into a healthy heterosexual marriage, good job, grandkids for us to enjoy. But, Madam Speaker, if our children grow up and they don't fit that perfect picture, they decided not to take that route. They didn't enter into a heterosexual relationship. They didn't get the little white house and a picket fence. Maybe they decided not to have kids. Maybe they decided to enter into a same-sex relationship. Do we stop loving them? Do we isolate them? Do we treat them different from our other kids? Or do we embrace them and continue to love them as our kids, as good human beings, although they didn't choose the path that we hoped that they had chosen? I grew up in the church. We walked to Sunday school every Sunday morning. Sometimes went to church Sunday nights with my mother. But we also, and we were taught to be good Christians. We were taught to believe in our God. We were taught to pray to Him and to trust in Him. But I also learned other things from my parents. We had our Sunday brunches where everyone was invited, where the entire family came together, put aside differences, accepted each other for who we are, enjoyed a nice Sunday brunch. I was taught that at Christmas, anyone in the neighborhood that didn't have a meal came and sat under the Gannett tree, and oftentimes my mother would serve them before we were able to eat. There was a gentleman who lived on my street who was, at the time, and his soul rest in peace, he's no longer with us, but he was an alcoholic. And everyone referred to him with a very derogatory name. And I, like everyone else, one day called out to him in the same fashion. And within seconds, I felt the blow of my father's hand on the back of my head. And he said, "That is Mr. So-and-so to you." And I then continued growing up calling him Mr. So-and-so. And he, later on, married, stopped drinking, started a construction company, and became a very productive and respectful citizen in our country, albeit in his later days. But it made me feel good to know that my parents instilled in me the respect for that individual, that I always addressed him with the manners that he deserved as a human being. Madam Speaker, I too have, and we have for many years now, discussed this issue with our constituents. And like Mr. Miller said, there were those who felt strongly that they didn't want to see any changes or any acceptance or any form of recognition of same-sex marriages or civil unions. But for the majority, they all agreed that it would be better for us to put in place some recognition for civil unions than to have the United Kingdom legislate same-sex marriage. Even our young people, and we often talk about listening to our young people. Sometimes we want to do it when it's convenient. You heard it all over the place when we were talking about the port. You hear it all over when you talk about the environment. But that's when it's convenient to us as adults to say, listen to our young people. But if you speak to our young people, they will also tell you that they will not entertain any form of discrimination. They will also tell you that they too don't necessarily want to see same-sex marriages happening here or becoming the norm in the Cayman Islands, but they do not accept any form of discrimination. Our future, the young people who will lead this country in the future, the young people who would lead the world in the future, they are becoming much more tolerant. They're not acceptant or accepting of the ways in which those before them have demonstrated our inability to accept people for who they are, to not discriminate due to race, due to color, due to religion. Consistently across the world, just like they advocate for the environment, our young people advocate for love, togetherness, and forgiveness. Quite often, Madam Speaker, we feel this way about people, not because they're or a particular group or a particular religion or a particular nationality. Quite often we feel this way towards them because we simply just don't understand them. Perhaps, Madam Speaker, if we show understanding, if we show compassion, we may see them in a different light. Like the leader of the opposition said in his contribution, that when he expresses his views on the subject, and should they not align with those that support this bill or those that support that lifestyle, that he's attacked. Maybe, just maybe, if we show compassion and understanding to those individuals, we may understand them a bit more and they may understand us a bit more. And maybe, just maybe then, the attacks may stop. Madam Speaker, these are our own people, our family, our friends, our children, our friends' children. We knew them when they were kids, and we loved them then. We love them as shining examples of our young, talented Caymanians. And Madam Speaker, personally, if I have in any way made them feel any different in any of my actions, in my words, or in my silence, I apologize to them. Madam Speaker, if our children, if our friends' children have chosen to enter into a healthy relationship with someone they love, even if that person is of the same sex, I am still as proud and love them in the same way I did when they were those kids growing up. Just to be clear, Madam Speaker, I am not endorsing or approving any form of lifestyle choice or any individual's beliefs. And equally so, Madam Speaker, I am not condemning anyone for their lifestyle choice or for their individual beliefs. Madam Speaker and honorable members of this House, colleagues, we have an opportunity as elected leaders to control our own destiny in this matter. To control our own destiny in the acceptance and recognition of those in civil unions and the rights afforded to them by our very own Constitution and our Bill of Rights, further supported by the European Court of Human Rights. Madam Speaker, colleagues, we have an opportunity as leaders of our three beautiful islands to demonstrate acceptance and compassion and put an end to the discrimination against those who, as consenting adults, have entered into civil unions. Madam Speaker, let us put this contentious issue behind us. Let us unite the people of our three beautiful islands. Let us not have legislation forced on us by the United Kingdom and continue the segregation and disharmony amongst our people. Let us continue in our own rights and individually to be God-fearing and to respect our Lord. Let us continue to be forgiving. Let us continue to be accepting. Let us continue to say that these three islands, the Cayman Islands, is the best place on earth to live. Let us all seek the ability to live in harmony and understanding of each other. Madam Speaker, it is not a perfect bill. There is no perfect piece of legislation. But I believe we have an opportunity here in this House during this session to put in place legislation that will afford the rights to those who choose to enter into civil unions, to put in place legislation that will end any form of discrimination towards them, put in place legislation that hopefully will draw harmony amongst us on this issue, and most importantly, put in place legislation that would stop the United Kingdom from legislating for us, perhaps putting in place legislation that would be far more liberal than this bill, and something that I don't think any of us in this House and most of us throughout this country would rather see or would like to see happen to us. So, Madam Speaker, with those few words, I intend to support this bill, and I would encourage my colleagues in this House to join with me in doing so and in putting this very difficult, very difficult topic to rest, and then we can move on with working together, as I said earlier, to continue to make this country the best place on earth to live. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? I recognize the member for Savannah.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm sure those of you that know me, when you look at this tie I have on today, know what I'm all about in this situation. This tie shows a lot of children that has been through and will go through difficult times. Madam Speaker, most of the time when I stand up here to speak on this subject, going back to way back when, this special minority that I hear we're so gracefully defending has called it what I say hate speech. I would venture to say, Madam Speaker, that about every one of us at some time in our life has been through the Bible, and I try to follow it as much as I can. If I indicate that it comes from the Bible, how some of these people will say it's hate speech, he's talking hatred, it's this, it's that. Sad. A few years ago, it was estimated that about 2% in the United States had shared these feelings that we're talking about today so gloriously. Probably it's up to about 5%. Saw in one of the notices that here in the Caribbean, and I guess we were all different, about 90% do not support this style of living. Anyway, let me say a few words about the hate speech. Romans 8, 5 to 6. Those who have, according to the sinful nature, how their mind set on what that nature desires, but those who live in accordance with the Spirit, how their minds set on what the Spirit desires. The mind of sinful man is death, but the mind controlled by the Spirit is life and peace. Madam Speaker, as I look around and see and hear, it just seems that God's word is forgotten. It's evidently that the impact that my Bible has on me does not affect all of my colleagues here in the Legislative Assembly. Madam Speaker, sadly, what is really historic about our modern era is that a behavior that for thousands of years was understood as a social and moral evil, a perversion and an abomination in God's sight, is now being promoted not only as normal behavior, but as something everyone should accept as good. Moreover, Madam Speaker, people are being told that those who hold the biblical beliefs regarding good and evil are actually bad people who are stubbornly holding on to what former President Obama labeled worn arguments and old activities. Madam Speaker, the Bible clearly reveals that God created a woman for a man and a man for a woman, and that marriage is to be between a man and a woman. That can be found early in the Bible in Genesis chapter 2, verse 18, 23, and 25. Madam Speaker, Scripture plainly states that God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah because of their wickedness and depravity and homosexuality. Do we think Cayman will get exceptional treatment when the time comes? God had specifically instructed Moses to warn the children of Israel that it was an abomination in his sight. That can be found in Leviticus 18, verses 22, chapter 20, 13. Certain prophecies, Madam Speaker, and consequences. What progressive social reformers do not seem to understand is that God predicted in his Bible what is actually happening today in the modern Israelite nations, such as United Kingdom, United States, Canada, Australia. Long ago, God inspired Moses to warn the Israelite people I know that after my death, you will become utterly corrupt and turn aside away from the way which I have commanded you, and evil will befall you in the latter days, because you will do evil in the sight of the Lord, to provoke him to anger. Deuteronomy 1:31-29. God warned Israel through the prophet Isaiah, woe to those who call evil good and good evil, which is what we are seeing today. God also prophesied through Isaiah. The leaders of this people caused them to err, and those who are led by them are destroyed. Isaiah 9:16. Madam Speaker, I encourage our Cayman leaders to take notice of this warning from the Bible. I urge us to stand strong in this corrupt world. Our great Creator has blessed humanity with the wonderful benefit of marriage and family. When the foundation of the matrimonial relationship between husband and wife is strong and secure, it heralds great advantages for the future of society at large. However, Madam Speaker, when the groundwork of family and marriage is destabilized, the entire society experiences the injurious effects and places its very survival at stake. And if you all doubt me, look at what's happening in the once greatest nation on earth, the United States. Right now, Madam Speaker, it's in a shambles. Riots, this, that, next thing. Because you don't like Christopher Columbus statue, you tear it down. This is just the tip of the iceberg, Madam Speaker. The Bible tells us in the end days, all of this will come to pass. Sadly, as I said, we are witnessing the very situation today in what amounts to an all-out war against family and marriage. Madam Speaker, back to the bill that is before us. This has become the most difficult time in my almost 30 years of politics in this honorable House. Everyone in here knows my stand on this. I'm saddened to see what happened. Especially, Madam Speaker, after what we've been through for the last 3, 4, 5 months with COVID. And our great Premier has done such a marvelous job with this, handling and bringing us down to zero. But to me, Madam Speaker, not being critical of him, I cannot be. I worked with him for many years, long time. It reminds me, Madam Speaker, when old people say a cow that gives a good bucket of milk and then she turns around and put her foot in it. I don't mean that in a derogatory manner, because in the position that he's in and his interpretation of what the courts have said and others, but my court comes from my Bible and my beliefs that I cannot and I will never compromise no matter what. I worry about not what the persecution that I've taken here because of my stand on this subject. It doesn't matter. What I worry about and what we all need to worry about is what will happen to our souls when we move off and on from this little piece of paradise that we're living in today. We cannot expect to get special treatment, Madam Speaker, if we disobey God. It not gonna happen, Madam Speaker. My emphasis now, Madam Speaker, is what's going to happen. Yes, I hear this is a preventative measure from being declared by the United Kingdom that they're going to do an order in council to put the marriage thing on us. Madam Speaker, as many have said and pointed out, a rose is a rose by any sweetness or any color. I've seen some beautiful ones. Madam Speaker, unless we're living or blind or deaf, when we look around and see what's happening in other countries that has adhered and adopted and practiced this situation, the slippery slide they're on, is scary. I turn my focus to some of the negative consequences that can result from this type of lifestyle. In the United Kingdom, a lady complained to the police of the noise from a gay pride march, and they warned her for prosecution. You think once we adopt this, that we're going to be exempted from the furtherance of this to the fullest hilt that's taking place around us in the name of human rights? They termed it hate speech. Adoptive parents were prevented from adopting any longer because they used the biblical definition of marriage. Of one man and one woman, as the Bible talks about. In Sweden, Madam Speaker, people are put in jail for criticizing homosexuality, and it was upheld on appeal by the courts. Here we go with the courts again. Sometimes I wonder if they try to tell us as legislators what to do. Thank goodness we got over one hurdle by the appeal court that separated and gave us back some of the power that we talk about so much, where the Legislative Assembly make the laws and others carry them out. In France, there's no freedom of conscience. You must perform homosexual marriage. And I see they got a little piece in there to pacify our local ministers and pastors that, oh, you ain't worrying how to do it, the registrars and this and that. Oh, okay. I wish them luck. Times will change. Trust me, it will, Madam Speaker. In Canada, judge ruled that parents have no rights to know what children are being taught in school. Madam Speaker, freedom of speech and religion is being threatened. For those of you who have grandchildren, and I enjoy when mine come over and want to watch the cartoons, they're now inflaming them with that type of message. Can you imagine 3, 4-year-old? How they're going to digest this and handle this thing in their mind? Can you imagine the confusion when this conflagration goes all over the place? I don't think we as a politician understand the danger that we are facing. What you do in private, that is up to you. I don't care. But when this first surfaced and Mr. Raznovich and those others wanted to change our marriage law and our constitution, we had a chance to stand up. We had a chance to stand up. But oh no, Hallmark Family Network is now talking about changing all of their programming, or some of their programming, to this lifestyle. Madam Speaker, just want to briefly read, and matter of fact, some of this is already recorded in the Hansards of this House in some of my other debates, but just a reminder. This was the American Psychological Association back in almost 1 year, on the 29th of July, 2015. The concerns by then the judiciary. In addition to judicial concerns about lesbian and gay parents themselves, courts have voiced 3 major fears about the influence of lesbian and gay parents on children. The first of these fears is that development of sexual identity will be impaired among children of this belief. For instance, one such concern is that children brought up by lesbian mothers or gay fathers will show disturbances in gender identity and or in gender role behavior. It has been suggested that children brought up by lesbian mothers or by gay fathers will themselves become lesbian or gay people. A second category of concerns involves aspects of children's personal development other than sexual identity. For example, courts have expressed fears that children in the custody of gay or lesbian parents will be more vulnerable to mental breakdown, will exhibit more adjustment difficulties and behavior problems, and will be less psychologically healthy than others. So you see, Madam Speaker, it's not just my belief and others' beliefs of what's happening and what's going on, but from higher ups that have seen the exposure through whatever process, the damage that can happen to the youngsters. That's my concern. It should be all of our concern. Madam Speaker, with your permission, I found it quite interesting. This was an article the 29th of November 2015. This was written, Madam Speaker, and I'll have let me make a copy for you. This was written by, as a gay expat, I've held back on saying anything on this matter, but it's important now because it appears that no one expat is speaking for the entire country and gays on a whole. Goes on to say, I moved to the Cayman Islands a few years ago and traveled back and forth. When I moved there, I knew the law and lay of the land. I moved there primarily to get away from the big city. Cayman is unique and very diversified, and that's what makes it attractive. As a member of the gay community, I never once thought to seek to have anyone change their views to accommodate me. And it's for that reason I have to say something today. One gay person or couple should not have influenced a government to act without speaking to their people on the matter. This is the biggest concern with this whole situation. Gays were living and continue to live in Cayman before I moved there, and we existed quite fine and received the same warm service from all. Will Cayman be the same going forward? No, I'm afraid not. There's a side of the gay community that many gays want absolutely nothing to do with. That side being to cause problems, stage protests upon protests. You've seen this on television. Gay Pride March, New York, different cities. You see what happened? You see what happened? Ask for unreasonable demands, and they will never stop. Once you start to please them, it never ends. And history has shown that. I'm afraid that floodgates might be opening to attract the ugly side of the community to Cayman, the stuff we moved away from. Goes on to say, please do not be fooled to think we are accepted everywhere in the world. Many of us live among others with no problems at all. Those of us that seek not to cause any civil unrest. It's about having respect for where you have decided to move to. Please, please, Cayman, do not be fooled to think all the expats in the gay community are pushing this agenda. That is totally incorrect. And if anything, we are just embarrassed and would never fight a country's government on an issue we can make decision to move and fix for ourselves. There's an ugly side to the gay community which many do not want to be a part of. They do not create any sound ties with the community except for what you are seeing now. And in a few years, we'll move on to create unrest elsewhere. Finally, Madam Speaker, the views of the majority of anyone, if you really all wanted to stay in Cayman and supposedly love it as we do, why now have you created such a divide in the community you supposedly love? How does that work really? You love the country, but you set out to destroy its character. Madam Speaker, the Premier and the Leader of the Opposition mentioned about the formal position letter from the Cayman Ministers Association. And with your permission, I think most of us have gotten it. I would like to read some of it. Not for the House, but for the public listening to know what is happening there. I would just like to mention before I read that, Madam Speaker, that all of my colleagues here in the official opposition have met with most of the leaders of the churches in our districts and got feedback from them. And Madam Speaker, overwhelmingly, they told us in no uncertain terms the way they wanted us to vote on this, and that was to vote no. My colleague from Newlands, who is a technological wizard, was able to do a survey, and he will share the results of that we did in Savannah, Newlands, and I think probably from some of the other districts that took part in it. And the numbers that we saw come in, it left no doubt in our mind what the vast majority of Christian Caymanians wanted us to do. You don't have to hate the person. The Bible tells you you hate the sin. So if there's something that I see that is going wrong, if I see you're going to fall off of a cliff or something, I'm going to tell you about it. That is my responsibility, and it should be all of our responsibilities through the experience that we have gathered over the decades that we help people and tell them about the difficulties surrounding and what will emanate eventually, if the Lord allows the world to last that long. Domestic partnership, doing what is right for the right reasons. Formal position letter written by the Cayman Ministers Association. As we in Cayman continue to grapple with the contentious and divisive issue of sexuality and gender, in this case framed in the terms of a domestic partnership bill, let us be aware of some of the pitfalls that have been strategically placed before us, in particular before our Parliament, for it is ultimately our elected representatives who have to run this obstacle course. The first alarm that we must sound is for us to discern reality from illusion. The reality is that our Christian heritage and worldview does clearly hold love as the ultimate ethic behind our actions. However, we must not allow our concept and application of love to be reinterpreted by secularists, especially those who have rejected the truth expressed in the scriptures about the sacredness of sex and marriage. In particular, we are to be guided by the biblical ethic of love. We must start first with what the Lord Jesus said was the first and great commandment: to love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. The second is like it: love your neighbor as yourself, states Jesus. This is not just a sequential arrangement, but a prioritized arrangement. We must begin by loving the Lord God before we can understand and apply the second, loving our neighbor. Clearly, it is not possible to love the Lord without respecting, loving, and keeping his commandments regarding the sacred character of marriage, and therefore the sacredness of sexuality and sex. The first divine purpose for marriage is that it was ordained for the increase of mankind, according to the will of God, and that children might be brought up in the fear and nurture of the Lord, and to the praise of his holy name. If making a decision about the current domestic partnership bill is to be guided by this ultimate ethic of love, then we, the public, and our legislators must not fail or fall into the trap of conflating love with approval. Love acts in the best interest of others and not merely to meet the wishes or desires of those we care about or are responsible for. To say yes to this bill and then defend one's position by an appeal to love may give the appearance of taking the moral high ground, when in reality, it may only be doing what is circumstantially expedient. This leads us to identify the second trap we must avoid: equating desires with rights. The current scenario, representing a seismic shift in Western morality, has resulted in legislators and courts seemingly accepting the default position that a desire, whether or not one seen to be in the higher level of the hierarchy of human needs, must be catered to and reframed as a right, sometimes without sufficient or any consideration of the pressing needs of other affected and vulnerable parties or the long-term good of society. Drawing upon the biblical ethic of love and morality, we acknowledge that human desire is the worst possible foundation for determining public and private morality. What is good, both for the person and for the community as a whole, old and young, adults and impressionable children, does not answer to the demands of fleshly passions, but rather must answer to the question of what is truly right. This is the real issue, and this is the criterion that every elected member of our parliament must apply as they engage their hearts and minds fully in this exercise. Again, our appeal to both the public at large and our legislature is that we do not conflate rights with desires, or conflate love with approval. It is important to avoid confusing the love expressed in the scriptures with secularism's counterfeit version of love. Doing what is right for the right reasons, regardless of the consequences, is a fundamentally biblical approach to all of life. This is our appeal to you. Madam Speaker, I responded this was back in 18th of November last year, when Colors Cayman was raising concerns about our education minister putting the right things forward in the anti-bullying rules. And I went on to defend her and saying the concerns of the majority of, and these are in the Hansards, Madam Speaker, for your information. The concerns of the majority of Caymanians is what will happen in the future to Cayman if the same-sex partners, when they get their foot in the door, as frequently is now happening in Canada, USA, Europe, and other countries where literally anything goes. Children as young as 4 years old are being taught in schools, and the education boards in some places give their approval, where adults actually go in and demonstrate to these precious innocent children. Drag queens going to the libraries. Matter of fact, some time ago, Madam Speaker, some of these I understand was down at the wonderful Kimpton Hotel that many people like to frequent, and read their trash to these children. Is this what we want our Cayman parents to face when the floodgates are opened? Children in elementary schools will be exposed to the rightness and complete normality of homosexuality, bisexuality, and transgender expression. Or opposing views will be branded as dangerous and homophobic, to be silenced and excluded from the classrooms. Madam Speaker, there's a gay agenda. It's an organized effort to produce political, social, and religious changes within society that will lead to a tolerating and eventually accepting as normal homosexual relationships. For a better understanding on how this gay agenda started, over 50 years ago, I urge you to read the book, The Marketing of Evil, by David Kupelian. Came on with the proliferation of hate speech laws around the world. Evangelical pastors have been jailed in some countries for merely quoting the Bible and labeling the behavior a sin. I have quoted these scriptures in our legislative assembly, and I've been vilified and called all kinds of nasty names, but this is what my Bible says. Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, this is no joke with what we are dealing with. Cayman does not have the capacity if this gets out of hand. And if you look at the television and the whatlessness that goes on in these gay pride parades, you will know what I am talking about. On the 5th of April 2018, the United States Department of Health and Human Services posted this statement on their website. In the United States, gay, bisexual, and other men who have sex with men are the population most affected with HIV, according to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. About 67% of people diagnosed with HIV in 2015 in the United States were gay and bisexual. I urge all, especially our Christian praying ones, to pray for God's continuing blessings and protection from some of the tidal waves that we will be facing in due course unless Jesus steps in. Madam Speaker, continuing in that light, there was an article in the Telegraph on the 24th, just a couple of days ago, where the UK Education Secretary has said that parents cannot veto children taking part in LGBT lessons, as he warns that myths are being spread about the content of the classes. Damian Hines' intervention comes amid a row over relationship and sex education classes, with several primary schools in Birmingham suspending the lessons following protests and petitions from Muslim parents. Parkfield Community School, along with 5 primaries run by the Lee Trust, postponed the No Outsider program, where children are taught about same-sex couples and gender identity. Mr. Hines has now weighed in to support head teachers, saying that while they should listen to parents' views, they should not allow them to dictate what is taught at school. Finally, Madam Speaker, just a few weeks ago, this article came up. Massachusetts city officially recognizes polyamorous relationships. You see, one thing leads to the next, and once something is set in place, and under the auspices of human rights and precedents, what will we be able to do, Madam Speaker, if these things creep into our beloved Cayman Islands? The city of Somerville, Massachusetts, has passed an ordinance making it one of the first cities in the nation to officially recognize polyamorous relationship. The city no longer limits the number of people included in a partnership. Instead of defining a relationship as an entity formed by two persons, Somerville now legally defines it as an entity formed by people. During our initial conversations, a couple things jumped out, Davis said, was one of the pilots of this legislation. The first draft required domestic partners to notify the city of any change of address, which struck me as not in line with what marriage folks have to do, and required that they reside together, which again struck me as something I'm not required to do as a married person. So we got rid of those provisions. It's estimated that 4 to 5% of people living in the United States are currently participating in polyamorous relationships, or what's otherwise known as consensual or ethical non-monogamy, a practice in which partners maintain more than one sexual or romantic relationship with each other's knowledge and consent. If you think the society is not getting sick, you just keep listening, Madam Speaker. For comparison, that means non-monogamy is about as prevalent as the number of Americans who identify as LGBTQ, which is estimated to be about 4.5, I said 5% of the American population. It is illegal in all 50 states to be married to more than one person, which is known as polygamy, not polyamory. Polyamorous people who try different kinds of arrangements, such as a married couple with steady outside partners, run into their own legal problems. Madam Speaker, there's no legal framework for polyamorous families to share finances, custody of children, or the rights and responsibilities that come with marriage. Madam Speaker, I pray that my interpretation of some of these concerns never come to pass, but it is my responsibility, Madam Speaker, to warn our people that once that liberal mantra gets rolling in Cayman, a small 50, 60,000 people, depending on where we are now, how are we going to deal with it? I urge my colleagues to think about this. It's about our children, how we feel about them, how they will deal with these scary situations. May God bless this Parliament, these Cayman Islands, keeping us healthy and safe and our families, and guide us into doing that which is right and which is glorious to His holy name. I thank you.
Members, we will continue the debate on the Domestic Partnership Bill 2020 tomorrow. I will now call on the Honourable Premier to move the adjournment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I move the adjournment of this House until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. We will attempt to wind up the debate on this important bill tomorrow. And as we have a significant amount of other business, including private members' business, that we want to get through in the course of this week.
The question is that this House will now adjourn until 10 a.m. Tuesday, the 28th of July, 2020. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, no. The ayes have it. This Honorable House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. Tuesday, the 20th of July, 2020.